The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Break's webinar, Good Practice in Going 20. Thank you very much for all logging in and signing in this afternoon and attending our webinar. Thank you also to all our speakers who I will introduce in a short moment, and also to Allianz Insurance for sponsoring this webinar, so it's free for everybody to attend. We will hear through all our speakers shortly. We've got Gary Ray from Break, who will give a brief introduction into Break and our work with Go20 initiative. Then we've got Councillor Roger Symonds from Bath and North East Somerset Council, Andy Preston, Project Delivery and Environment Manager at Cambridge City Council, Councillor Phil Jones from Camden, London Borough Council, and Sergeant Paul Mountford from Merseyside Police, and Nicola from SOMO. Following this webinar, we will send you all an email with details about Go20, a feedback form, and also a link to the presentations, which will all be available on our website. Next week, we will email you a toolkit, so we're going to have a load of free resources available for you following this webinar to hopefully help you in your quest to Go20, or if you just need some more information. So we will email you a link for resources, fact sheets, posters, leaflets, and also web resources and banners. We are also recording this webinar, so all going well, we should be able to send you the recording of this webinar afterwards as well. I will just first of all hand you over to Gary Ray, who is our campaigns manager here at Break.
And I'm going to give you a quick 5 minutes through this presentation, essentially talking about some headlines in terms of what Break does as a charity, but also why we're involved in Go20. So that's my ugly face you can now see on the screen. We'll move on very rapidly from that. So we've been in this business now for 20 years, as some of you will know, campaigning on road safety, and I suspect we'll be here for another 20 years. These then are our priorities, working towards 20 miles an hour, more of which we'll say throughout this webinar. We're especially keen, of course, to talk about training and testing and the reform of the whole law when it comes to road safety. And one of the things we're particularly keen on by way of introduction is graduated driving licenses, for example. Young males in particular at greatest risk of being involved in a road crashes. 17 to 20-year-old male drivers 10 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured while driving than a 40 to 59-year-old. That's something we want to push government to change. You'll not be surprised to hear that we are calling for zero tolerance on drink and drug driving, an issue that still resonates with the public, and interestingly, drug driving now becoming quite a serious issue for us. An estimated 200 deaths every year caused by drink driving, and Break is unashamedly clear in calling for zero tolerance on drink and drug driving. We're lagging behind the rest of Europe in that legislation, in terms of legislation. So that's something that we want to focus on over the next year, 2 years. Tougher punishment is a major campaign call that we have, and although the government has pledged to review all of the sentencing, fines and penalties in relation to road offences, we think that there is scope now to call for tougher sentences, because in the work we do with our helpline, we see the effects that road crashes have on victims' families. So that's a key area of campaign work for us. Campaigning on driver eyesight, perhaps not seen by many as a priority. It ought to be, and I'll tell you for why, because poor vision, estimated to cause nearly 3,000 road casualties every year. So that's why we see that as a main focus. And of course, last but not least, promoting safe driving through work. Professional drivers on our roads we think have a special, almost ambassadorial role to play in terms of exhibiting good practice, and indeed through the employers, the duty of care that we perceive and believe employers ought to have in terms of protecting their workforce. So a whole division of Brake concentrating on that area of work. And I guess a summary of all that, of course, is partnership working. We are only as effective and as good and can change laws, can change people's minds, can change attitudes through working with others, which brings us neatly on to why we're here today. And this is about, of course, Go20. For us at Brake, it's about the Go20 coalition. And you can see that we have gathered, and others have gathered together, a goodly number of organisations there, because we really do believe that to effect change, where we're changing a significant piece of legislation, the ambition to change the default speed limit from 30 miles an hour to 20 miles an hour can only be done in concert with other people, ranging from the Alzheimer's Society through to British Cycling and the Ramblers, Road Peace, and a special mention, of course, to 20's Plenty and Rod King, who spearheads much of this work and keeps us all on our toes. And we're grateful for his work in particular in pushing Go20. Where would we be without Rod the God King? So it's important for us. So why should we go 20? Well, here's a few pointers. We absolutely, and the evidence shows that there will be, of course, fewer casualties. Drivers, more time to react in an emergency and avoid hitting someone. Stopping distances, for example, at 20 miles an hour, about half of those at 30 miles an hour. Children, we believe, and again the evidence backs this up, benefit from such a limit. Areas where 20 mile an hour limits, for example, have replaced 30 mile an hour limits really have seen significant reductions in casualties, 22% down in Portsmouth, and Camden, and we'll hear from Phil Jones later, where crashes have dropped by a significant proportion, some over 50% in some of those early trials. Phil doubtless will fill in the detail on that. What about these healthy lifestyles then? Well, you know, less fast traffic makes people feel safer. We think that encourages more walking and cycling, and where widespread 20 mile an hour limits have been introduced, walking and cycling has increased. Again, the figures prove it. 20% increase in cycling and walking in Bristol. And actually, you know, better health and prevention of illnesses like heart disease and diabetes really does put less strain on the NHS, and something that's been in the news this week. So actually, it saves the NHS money. This is an interesting one, sociable communities. You know, it's our view, and it's the view of the broader coalition that I mentioned, that 20 mile an hour limits really do help turn our streets from what we call soulless thoroughfares to actual enjoyable social spaces where people live, thrive and prosper. Lower traffic speed and traffic volumes really have been shown to improve the sociability of streets. Important, this one, less pollution. More people walking, cycling means less traffic, more carbon-free journeys, 20 mile an hour limits, reducing pollution by causing vehicles to travel at a more consistent speed. And again, an important one, I touched upon this, lower costs. It's important to stress this figure in particular for colleagues here today. Every road death in the UK estimated to cost over £1 million. So fewer casualties means less strain on the NHS and the emergency services. So some powerful figures there, some powerful rationale, we think, for why we ought to go 20. Now, my area of responsibility, how on earth do we translate some of those facts and figures and stats into messages? How does Brake and others deliver that message? Well, you won't be surprised to learn that we're keen on exploiting and using the media to best advantage. We're particularly keen on lobbying activity, and increasingly in the past 6 months we've been paying much more attention to social media, and if you go away with one message from me today, I would suggest that we can all increase our activity on social media, especially on the Twitter platform, but also Facebook and other sites as well. Just a bit on this then in terms of the effectiveness of work through media. We held, and Councillor Jones from Camden was there, a Go20 reception last year, Allianz very kindly sponsoring that. We had 48 attendees, of which MPs comprised 21. That's a very good going rate for MPs to attend. We had the Road Safety Minister there, the Shadow Road Safety Minister there, 2 members of the Transport Select Committee. We arranged what's called an early day motion, which kind of flags up in Parliament an issue of concern that day. We had 19 MPs signing that. More obviously, perhaps, in terms of our broadcast coverage, 51 opportunities to broadcast that message, including National Daybreak Television, Newsround, Sky News Radio, 5 Live, the LBC, which is now a national radio station. And I've just been reminded we had 33 MPs attending, updated as we speak to you, so I was doing ourselves a mischief there, a disservice rather. Press coverage. Press will always be important to all of us in terms of getting the messages across about Go20. 72 items of press coverage, ranging from the much-loved Daily Mail to the Daily Express and opinion pieces in important regional media like the Yorkshire Post. I mentioned social media, and there's something called Thunderclap, which we're very keen on, which is, essentially assembles all the messages and all the support that you want for a bespoke actual campaign, and it launches when you get enough support from that campaign. And we did that with our Go20 campaign late last year, and what in practice that actually meant was that we can reach over 200,000 people, and that is further amplified by subsequent tweets. So really social media is something that we aim to grow, not just for our work on the Go20 campaign, but right across all our work at Break. It's very important to us. And it works. You see now on your screen those local authorities who have already signed up. By no means an exclusive list. We have now nearly 13 million people living in local authorities which are adopting or have adopted Go20. Well over 20 local authorities have gone 20. There is a movement for change. There is now a tipping point where we have reached where local authorities more and more across the land are going 20. We're keeping the pressure on government to make that 20 limit the default, so it actually makes it easier for local authorities to commit to the change. And frankly, as councillors on this call will recognise, it will save them money as well. So we think it's working, but of course there's more to do. I mentioned earlier the debt we owe to 2020. You can see their work there on that website link, and please do take a look at our own work at break.org.uk, and social media being what it is, I would suggest you all follow at Break Charity. That is me done by way of introduction. Thank you for listening. I look forward to listening to the rest of your contributions. Dave?
Thank you very much, Gary, and thank you for that brief presentation. As I mentioned earlier, and I'll recap, so we're going to listen to all of our speakers, and then we will have options for questions after each person. So after you've heard from each person, if you've got any questions at all that you would like to ask the presenter, then do feel free to type a question into the question box, or if you'd like to speak, you can raise your hand on the top icon on your screen. Apologies, I am delivering the next presentation on behalf of Roger, so I'll just pass over to Councillor Roger Symonds from Bath and North East Somerset Council.
Okay, Dave, I can start now, yeah? These slides, the first few, certainly deal with the efforts in Bath to get signs-only 20-mile-per-hour speed limits implemented across residential streets. And there's a few about how we campaigned, why we think 20-mile-per-hour areas are a good idea, and some of the lessons learned in the implementation, so that we would do it in a slightly different way if we went back to do it again. And we're now just about getting to the tail end of the project. Okay, next slide. So it's always been popular. I think as a councillor of many years standing, really early on people were complaining to me about the speed of motor vehicles in residential streets, and at that time we did have signs. We only had signs only that were advisory. We didn't have the signs only that are backed by a traffic regulation order, which is what we have now and could be enforceable. But we began campaigning in earnest in 2006, and one of the reasons was obviously in councils where there are many cuts in recent years, we have limited resources to do the 20-mile-per-hour zones, which contain speed humps and tables, etc., etc. They're very expensive, and so not very many areas had those. Quite a few of the villages in Bath, North East Somerset, but there weren't that many in the city. A few around schools, but because they were so expensive, what we wanted was a blanket 20-mile-per-hour speed limit that could be enforced. So the green advisory signs, which I've had in my ward since about 2006, I think, are now just being changed to the red circle, which is now enforceable. And we also discovered that Portsmouth had done an enforceable signs-only scheme, and at that time that was news to us. So we thought, well, if Portsmouth can do it, why can't we? And there's a few photographs here that appeared in newspapers, appeared in newsletters that went out during the campaign. Again, it's the media that we targeted to get our message across as much as we could, that's when we were in opposition, so we didn't have the power to actually implement the scheme. So we did surveys as well. I did a survey back in 2006 of 2 streets in my ward, and 80% of people in one and 100% in the other were in favour of 20-mile-per-hour limits. We didn't specify what they would be, but we just said, would you like a limit in your street? And they, yes or no, and we got a really good response. And I think this certainly gave me the message that that's what I ought to do in my own ward, and then we rolled it out across the authority. There were petitions from residents of the council administration, and again, not a lot of people didn't like speed humps. So apart from the economic view of not being able to put in many, they weren't that popular. That it was raised at scrutiny panel meetings, and we managed to get, even though there was officer administration opposition at that time, we managed to get a couple of pilot projects for a couple of years in advance. And so, next one please. It was a key part of our 2011 election manifesto. We have all up elections in Bath and North East Somerset, so there's a big change of councillors. And we made £500,000 available in our first administration. And again, there had been officer reluctance, and the previous administration weren't too keen, so obviously that had influenced officers. So it was we had to overcome that initially, and there was a rollout over 2 years. But in fact, it's actually gone on longer than that. It's been 3 years. We ensured that there was police support. I remember visiting the local chief superintendent who said, yes, they support 20-mile-per-hour speed limits in residential areas, and they would enforce where they could with the resources that they had. So that was really important, because and up to that time, my experience of the police had been that unless you physically restrict traffic, they didn't support 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. Next one. Next one, please. The photograph there was just a couple of zones. Can you go back? Can you go back one, please? Yeah, and many people don't understand the difference between zones and 20-mile-per-hour signs-only areas, and people still seem to talk about zones, which is a small area where you have speed tables, etc. And these are a couple of examples from Sustrans, which are still applicable and are still very useful. Okay, and in January 2013, there was a DFT guideline that really meant that it wasn't just quiet residential streets where we could put in 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. We had the sort of the OK from the DFT where there was significant journeys on foot or cycle movements, or where they were likely to increase, that we could put in 20-mile-per-hour speed limits. So that brought in main roads as well, not just the secondary roads. And I think a lot of that was to do with the campaigns by Brake and by 20 is Plenty that had got through to government, and they made that change. So a few reasons why that are pretty obvious, I think, most of them. We can cover all residential streets. I've covered that cheaply and quickly. I'm not sure about the quickly in Bath, North East Somerset. Lots of authorities have done it quicker than us. We can make streets safer for people on bikes and on foot, make streets safer for children to play in. And part of the way through our implementation, the Times Cities Fit for Cycling campaign, it was one of their 10 points, so we were already doing that, so that was a good plus. And we want to end the domination of motorised vehicles and give the streets back to people. So that is really a cultural change, to end the domination of motorised vehicles after about 40 or 50 years. It is going to take some time, and we wanted to give residents more control of their own streets, and that's the complaint we get, that people driving through drive at speed, using streets as a rat run, so we wanted to get rid of that too. The and obviously one of our big projects is to give precedence to walking, cycling and public transport in Bath, North East Somerset. We have a transport problem like many cities, and that's what we hope to do too, and we're trying to do that now to reduce the number of vehicles in the city centre. And the Manual for Streets with Shared Space is, I think, is a real Bible for local authorities' transport sections to use, and it's not been used very much in Bath, North East Somerset, but it is now. It's quite high up the agenda, and we wanted to promote understanding, tolerance, and awareness in all users of our streets. And to me, that's the most vital thing that we can do. You often get, I'm a cyclist, I walk, and I drive a car, so I know, and I use public transport. So all of those issues come up, and I've certainly tried to be as tolerant as I can, whether I'm in the car, on the bike, or walking, of other users. And I think until we get that tolerance, understanding, and awareness, then we're still going to have danger on the streets. So I think, to me, that's the most important. But that is probably the most difficult to implement. So a couple of slides here where we could have done better. We went straight into it after the election, and decided to roll it out in 2 years as quickly as we could. So we didn't do educational preparation before the scheme began, and it was only at a 20-mile-per-hour speed limit conference about a year later that I found out about a young woman called Sarah Toy, who is at UE and who had done a piece about soft measures before you implement 20 miles per hour, where it gets communities on side. So really you don't need that much consultation. If you do a decent preparation, it will save you later on in consultation. So that we missed, and if I had to go back again, that's what I would do. And then we rolled out by collision record, so there was no consistency of implementation. The boundaries were artificial. What I had wanted to do was to, and I can understand why we rolled it out on the collision record, because of safety issues, but sometimes there'll be a street, halfway up street, there would be a 20 mile per hour sign with 30 on the back, and I couldn't understand that. So what we should have done is just roll it out across the authority. So we did do a lot of consultation, delivering leaflets to each household, and that did actually activate people who were against the 20 mile per hour limits, although there was only one area where the town council, the parish council, there was a slight majority in favour of 20, but town council and parish council in one town didn't want it, so we didn't do it. But that's the only place. So it's taken 3 years, 1 year longer than estimated. There's been issues of illness as well, so I think we could have done it quicker and more efficiently. So what should have happened to me was 6 months education, awareness raising. I'd advise any council to do that first of all. More hands-on with a senior officer monitoring and reporting back to Cabinet regularly on progress, and just simple rollout across the area geographically, and reduce consultation to a minimum. If you've done 6 months education, then it should be, consultation should be then at a minimum. After all, it was in our manifesto, we were going to deliver it anyway, but we did do this sort of quite detailed consultation. And that's the end of the presentation. If you can, the last photo on the top left is the 20 mile per hour advisory sign with a green in a green circle, which we've had quite a few of those. And on the right hand side is the new enforceable 20 mile per hour sign with the red circle. And we're seeing many, many more of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Roger. If anybody has any questions for Roger, then please do type a question into the question box or raise your hand. I know we've had a couple of questions come in for other speakers, so I will put them to the speakers when we get to their reports. I've just got a quick one there, Roger. You mentioned when you first came into power, and you said there was a bit of reluctance, and in particular officers obviously within the council. Obviously it's difficult sometimes to try and get public support outside, but what kind of reluctance was there? What were the concerns of officers working within the council, and kind of how did you overcome those concerns with those officers?
Yeah, I mean, the previous administration was against, so they weren't interested in 20 mile per hour, and officers were concerned about enforcement, and quite a normal issue, I think, that the police wouldn't be able to enforce, and to a certain extent the police can't enforce. They do what they can, but they can't necessarily enforce 20 mile per hour, and I think they weren't convinced on the benefits of being across the area. I think the first ones that went in, we haven't got any figures about before and after yet, but I think the first ones that went in, they recognised that there was a difference, and the police did start enforcing to start with, so that took away that argument, and it was simply our sort of discussions with officers and putting forward our reasons that persuaded them, I think, and obviously they would have had to do it anyway, but they weren't as reluctant later on as they were to start with.
We've got a question come in from Malcolm Whitmore. Says, can you advise what cost per resident you achieved? Don't know if you know that level of detail or whether there's...
No, I haven't got that detail. I mean, this is the presentation that I've done without going and getting the figures, so I could find that out. But we put in £500,000, and there's 167,000 residents in the authority. But no, I mean, we recognise that the 20 mile per hour is much cheaper than the zones, and very few zones can be implemented, but 20 mile per hour could go across the authority. So I'm sorry, I don't have that question, but it must be minuscule.
And another question from Lisa Graham says, are the claim of more people walking and cycling in 20 make streets safer for pedestrians and cycling? Is it backed up by evidence? So is the fact that the claim that obviously if there's more 20 mile an hour areas, it is safer for people walking and cycling, and is there kind of any evidence, or did you have that in any of your reports?
We did have evidence from other authorities. I think we made 2 visits to Portsmouth, so we looked at evidence from there. We haven't yet got evidence from our own authority, but that was part of the project, is to monitor any change in the accident record, etc., and safety. And we have started this. The project where people can apply to close off their street to have a street party or whatever, and that's happening in the city. So it's that sort of general thing that we hope the 20 mile per hour will help with, in that people will feel their streets are safer, and therefore they will be able to use their streets more for local events.
I think we can back that up at Break as well. Obviously, we do a lot of campaign work and a lot of media work, and a lot of our campaign recently, and we do surveys as well. And our recent survey did back that young people in particular were saying that they didn't feel safe to be able to walk and cycle, whether it be to school or to work or just in their area. So people out there are actually saying, either telling us at Break or other charities and other organisations working in this sector, that they don't physically feel safe being able to get on that bike and cycle just due to the speed. So obviously 20 mile an hour does help with that. I've got another one, just final one, Roger, for you from Malcolm again. He says, what evidence in practice persuaded the police to support the scheme? As you mentioned, I know police, we'll obviously hear from Sergeant Paul Mountford later, and he might be able to talk a bit about this, but what persuaded the police kind of to support your scheme?
Well, I can only speak locally, because we asked for local support, and the superintendent was very keen. I was quite surprised, because what the police, as I mentioned earlier before, had always said that they could only enforce where there were practical measures in to slow motor vehicles down. And I mean, they do their best with 30 miles per hour, but obviously there are areas where the 30 mile per hour speed limit isn't enforced. But I was actually quite surprised that he said that he supported the 20 mile per hour in residential streets and would enforce where he could. So that was, I think at the time, I went to a conference where there was a representative of police speaking, and he was pretty sceptical about 20 mile per hour, to say the least. So it wasn't at that time general, but I think the police have sort of decided now that it is a good thing. And the police were a consultee, so it wasn't something that we were going to was going to prevent us from doing the 20 miles per hour, because it was something we felt we'd been convinced, and if the police weren't, then so be it. But they locally they were convinced quite early on. And in some of the issues about safety and improvement, 20 is plenty for us. Put out a press release last week about Edinburgh, where there have been considerable improvements with 20 miles per hour speed limits. And I always tweet those that come out on social media.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you very much, Roger. We'll move on. If anybody does have any more questions, then we might have a chance at the end to revisit that. But thank you very much for your presentation, Roger. So now we're going to hear from Andy Preston, who is the Project Delivery and Environment Manager at Cambridge City Council. So, hi Andy, it's over to you.
Okay, thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm going to talk to you this afternoon about the citywide project that we have implementing here in Cambridge, which is just entering its second phase of the project. So, just to begin with, just a few points, sort of why we're looking at implementing 20 miles per hour in Cambridge, starting with some of the push factors. So councillors, as Councillor Symonds has just referred to, frequent requests for localised limits from residents is an often request that councillors receive. Consolidating those limits and zones was one of the other factors, where there are some very strange arrangements where there is a 20 miles per hour limit on a more major route, and then a zone that comes off that limit on the side roads, and then there are signage where it has to explain that it's going from a limit to a zone, but ultimately the speed limit stays the same. So it's very confusing in terms of signing and inconsistent from that perspective. Cambridge is obviously quite a compact and historic city with limited highway infrastructure, so 20 miles per hour is quite suited to the environment of the city. As many of you be aware, it is one of the highest cycling levels in the UK, where 1 in 3 residents cycle to work. So the environment, the highway environment, is very conducive to being 20 miles per hour for those particular vulnerable road users. Cambridge is also growing significantly, with almost a third in the increase by 2031. So further pressure on the network and requirements for 20 miles per hour from that perspective. So some of the pull factors, as I mentioned, facilitate sustainable transport modes. So whilst we have a high level of cycling, particularly cycling, obviously walking as well, we're keen to increase that still to as high a level as possible. Improving those conditions for those vulnerable road users, pedestrians and cyclists. Reducing pollution levels, so 20 miles per hour, acceleration is less, braking is less, which are the biggest causes of pollution. Public health benefits, obviously, that go with that. Sustainable modes of transport, obviously, as well, in terms of cycling and walking, have significant health benefits. And obviously, the severity of incidents is reduced in a 20 miles per hour speed limit. Improvement to traffic flow, whilst there's little evidence of this at the moment, there is a suggestion that 20 miles per hour congestion can actually be improved in terms of the free-flowing, smoother movement of vehicles being able to access main roads from side roads with vehicles closer on approaching. And obviously, adding all that together, generally a more pleasant street environment for residents, and turning streets back to what they used to be, and that is for residents rather than from those driving through the area. So the scope of the project, it is a city council project with a capital budget of 600,000. 83,000 of that has been paid or will be paid to the county council, Cambridgeshire County Council, who are the highway authority in the city, and that payment is a committed sum for maintenance of the infrastructure that will be introduced, so the lining and the signs, as it is a signs and lines project only. We're implementing over 4 phases over 2 to 3 years, and as I say, we're in the second phase at this stage. The population of the city is 123,000. The road length is 216 miles, and the question that was asked about cost per resident, taking out the 83,000 in maintenance, the cost per resident is actually £4.20 on that basis. In terms of roads, all roads, residential roads, and the C classified roads are included within the scope, with the exception of the A and B roads at this stage, as it's currently against the County Council speed limit policy to look to implement 20 miles per hour limits on A and B roads. Obviously, that is something that potentially will need to be reviewed in the short to medium term. And I will come back to that as well, because there's already been a challenge to that, which has led to further development. 27 miles of existing limits and zones in the city, but there's 132 miles within the scope of this project, and with 85% of those being potential to become 20 miles per hour. The signs and lines only project, and obviously the cost is £3,800 per mile, which is, in terms of highway projects, is a very low cost to implement 20 miles per hour over a significant proportion of the city. As I mentioned, the highway authority is the county council. In terms of delivery of the project, we've set up a project board with key stakeholders right from the outset of the project to take them through delivery. So the representatives from the police, the inspector, the local inspector for police, represented on that board, taxi drivers, the local public transport authority, so the stagecoach, the managing director of stagecoach sits on that board as well. So there's a whole range of stakeholders that sit on that board and oversee the delivery of the project and have input into it, which has been led to one of the reasons that it's been delivered fairly successfully. So the approach, as I mentioned, it's in 4 phases. You can see the plan there on the right. So it's primarily by our area committees. We have 4 area committees in the city, which are local committees that have 3 or 4 wards within each committee and deal with more localism and local business. So it's been arranged around those, and they've all been consulted on as part of the delivery of the project. It was phased to be more practical and manageable in terms of the size of the city and introducing the speed limits and zones that have been introduced. It was identified through cost benefit in terms of which area the city was due to go first, with the north area more potential for take-up of sustainable modes of transport. And the county council, as the highway authority, were there to determine the traffic orders, the legal traffic orders, as the highway authority, and once they've been advertised. So the north area of the city, just looking in a little bit more detail, the blue areas are the unclassified roads, the red dashed lines are the classified C roads, and the blue dashed lines are the A or B roads, which were excluded from the project. So there's a significant number of obviously unclassified roads and C roads. So there's considerations, DFT setting local speed limits, 24 miles per hour mean speed, traffic surveys that were undertaken, which I'll come on to in the next slide. Land use, so schools, location of schools, shopping, parks and residential adjacent to these roads, and obviously alignments of the road environment, existing traffic calming, etc. were all taken into account. And obviously future highway changes as well were also considered with Cambridge's experience and significant amounts of growth. So considerations, the Cambridge has delivered predominantly zones rather than limits. One of the main reasons for this, obviously following DFT changes, traffic calming is now no longer required in the form of humps or tables, etc., or physical measures. Traffic calming is now classed as a repeater sign or a roundel on the carriageway. And the reason for introducing a zone is not only is the entry sign more visible, as you can see from the image, but existing signage that is there to highlight existing traffic calming features such as humps and tables can be removed. And in phase 1 alone we were able to remove 68 signs from the highway, which are obviously cluttering the highway, and then also many of those are illuminated, so there is a potential saving there, reduction in highway clutter with obviously the introduction of additional 20 miles per hour signage. As I've mentioned, there are prime visible entry points into the zones, and the zones obviously come off the C or A or B roads, and they are large areas, large zonal areas. So in terms of data, so for phase 1 area, which was the plan on the previous slide, we took 60 locations of existing traffic speeds on all of those, on a lot of those roads in that area, which obviously picked up speeds of vehicles and types of vehicles. 3 of the 5 C roads that are in that area were outside of the 24 mile per hour mean speed, which is the guidance for introducing 20 miles per hour. And the bus speeds, however, on the majority of those were at or around 20 miles per hour, with the exception of the C roads, which I'll again come back to. And the data, that data was then used in the engagement phase. And you can see there, it's probably difficult to read some of the numbers, but the 85th percentile and the mean speeds are all shown on that plan, which was made available to the public as part of the engagement phase. Bus speeds obviously separated out there as well, and this is one of the contentious issues in Cambridge has been from the transport provider, Stagecoach, in their perceived impact on journey times for buses and impact on bus routes, which has been a potential issue that has had a little bit of negative press from the implementation perspective, which hasn't helped with residents and their take-up of 20 miles per hour. This project has been blamed for some changes to the bus routes, which is an area that anybody delivering projects like this need to tackle at an early stage. And obviously we've had Stagecoach on the board throughout the project, but it hasn't prevented some negativity from that point of view, which is disappointing. Obviously looking as well at KSIs, those are all the incidents, recorded incidents. Luckily there's been no fatals in this area, slight and serious, and as has been alluded to at the beginning of these presentations, the cost of those incidents is also can also be seen there, which is in the millions. So the project obviously aims to not only reduce incidents but also reduce the severity of those incidents within the city. So engagement, very key, very important to the project, getting buy-in from residents as to why we are reducing speed limits. Engagement in the form of a document that was distributed to all residents in the area of the city by post, with significant amount of Twitter and Facebook, attendance at local events and exhibitions, and really trying to get rid of some of the misconceptions of 20 miles per hour by tackling it head on and making residents aware of the true facts and figures to do with introducing 20 miles per hour. So some images there of some of the events and the website and some of the documents that have been sent out to residents. So in terms of the response for the north phase, there were 17,000 leaflets sent out, with 4,500 responses received, 67% in support, which is 22% response rate, which is quite high for a highways consultation. So 2 in 1 in favour of introducing the lower speed limits. But there was a request to introduce lower speed limit on an A road, which since this presentation was written has moved forward and is moving forward to the statutory traffic order process as well. So things are certainly moving on in terms of the county's policy for introducing 20 miles per hour on actual A classified roads, which is a part of the ring road of the city. But in enforcement, just going back, enforcement was often a very key concern for residents in their responses to the consultation. And I am pleased to say that the police in Cambridge have been very active in enforcing the new limit in the north area of the city, which has now been in place for 6 months. People have been prosecuted for speeding within those limits, so it's which is obviously very good, and there's been a lot of media and press coverage of that, which has certainly helped in residents' impression of the limit and ensuring that it is complied with. So some misconceptions very quickly: the cyclists win again, quite a common response, obviously with quite a heavy pro-cycling, but obviously there is an anti-cycle campaign obviously in Cambridge as well. Cars aren't designed to do 20 miles per hour, which is quite a comical one also, which I'm not quite sure where that originates from, but I'll be late for work every day, again quite comical. Being stuck in second gear will increase pollution and use more fuel, which obviously is a misconception and all counts. What's the point when the police won't enforce it, which again is inaccurate, and that's obviously the support the police have provided us in delivering the project and being part of the board has helped to get rid of that misconception. And signs and lines only is a waste of money. It's certainly in terms of Cambridge, obviously we're aiming to do the whole city, so I think the use of signs and lines only has a much bigger impact when it's being delivered over a vast area of the city. And then finally, congestion is bad enough as it is. This will only make it worse. Again, no evidence as yet, but this is potentially again inaccurate, and hopefully the evidence will come out in the short to medium term to back that up. So very quickly, to remaining challenges ahead, obviously enforcement, continued enforcement, ensuring that the limit is complied with. Ownership of those limits by local residents and people using the local streets. Continuing the engagement campaign to keep it in the forefront of people's minds and the reasons for introducing 20 miles per hour. With the promotion campaign, keeping consistent that stakeholder support, and dealing with any streets where there potentially there are problems with compliance. And we are introducing collecting data at the moment for the north phase to get a comparison in terms of vehicle speeds before and after we've introduced the limit, and we'll do that on all phases in the project. And finally, project integrity, ending with the final slide, just ensuring that where those limits are introduced, that they do have an integrity, and that people can sign up to the reasons for introducing 20 miles per hour. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy, for that presentation. And again, if anybody has any questions to put to Andy, then please type your questions into the question box on the right-hand of your drop-down menu, and we will put those to Andy. Andy, with regards to you saying about obviously the response, and you had all those comments from people saying about being late for work and things like that. What's the response kind of now that as we stand at the moment? What reaction have you had from kind of media coverage or complaints? Does the council still get a lot of complaints from residents coming in, or have you seen those trickle off?
No, quite often the most common complaint is actually why certain streets aren't being reduced to 20 miles per hour. So, for example, some of the A roads and B roads in the city, a lot of complaints are, why aren't you actually introducing 20 miles per hour on those roads? And so it's almost the opposite. It's not complaints for introducing it. It's the opposite. So, which is obviously a good thing, but obviously we have to work within the county council's policy, and there are some streets within the city that certainly wouldn't be suited to 20 miles per hour signs and lines only, as it wouldn't have a big enough impact and have enough compliance to warrant introducing it. So it is pretty much the opposite. And in terms of the number of people objecting to it, it's limited. I think the main concern is with it being a signs and lines only, and not introducing physical measures as well. So I think the benefit is it's being introduced citywide, so it becomes more of a general standard speed limit rather than the opposite at the moment, where it is uncommon and relies on people seeing signs and complying in that way.
I know you mentioned obviously about bus journey times. Questions come in from Michael Grohl. He says, were any bus journey time surveys undertaken to allay stagecoaches' concerns?
There weren't any journey times undertaken as such, but we have the average speed of the buses on those routes. And as I mentioned in the presentation, the existing pre-20 miles per hour average speed of those buses is already at or around 20 miles per hour. So on that basis, the impact on journey times for those buses would be limited, and the number of routes that actually are impacted on in terms of the length of those routes within new proposed limits is very, very limited, and within other issues such as traffic signals and other natural traffic calming measures that already slow down the journey times for those buses or through those routes, or existing traffic calming measures, for example. So it's not something we've actually spent a lot of time in actually going out and measuring journey times, but we've basically used the ATC data to determine the existing average speeds and compared them against introducing 20. So we were very happy from the officer's perspective that it wasn't going to impact on those limits, on those bus routes. So it's an issue that has been difficult to deal with, obviously, because the press are keen to obviously find anything to have as a story against, as and when required. But it's generally been supportive, which is good.
We've got another question coming from Melissa McCann, I think from Calderdale Council. She says, who did the street survey? Who did your street surveys? I don't know whether you got a name or willing to share that now, or whether that's something to share afterwards. But kind of who did your surveys for you?
Yeah, there's a company that put down the loops for us across the whole area. I don't know what the name of the company is off the top of my head, but I can certainly take contact details and pass that on. But it's relatively inexpensive. It's I think it's around £60 per location. So it is relatively inexpensive to get a lot of data for a large area.
Okay, Melissa, we'll get those details for you afterwards. I think that's it for the time being, Andy. So thank you very much for your presentation. And like I say, if anybody does have any more questions for Andy, then feel free to type those in. And if we get a chance, we will put those to Andy at the end. Or once the presentations have finished, we'll be able to then put them to them via email. So next is Councillor Phil Jones, who is a councillor for Camden, London Borough Council. And it's over to you.
Hi,
Phil.
yes, it's. Thanks very much. Yeah, it was really interesting listening to those previous two presentations, because I realised what similarities there are often between bits of the country that you wouldn't necessarily think would face entirely the similar issues, but there were a lot of commonality between our experience in Camden, in Cambridge, in Bath and North East Somerset. So I want to focus a little bit more on how we engage with the public and how we raised awareness for our particular scheme. So we implemented a borough-wide 20-mile-per-hour limit in Camden in December last year, 2013. So it hasn't been in yet for a year. So at the present time, we're very much analysing all the changes that we're seeing at street level. But when we did implement it, I'd be fair to say it was probably the most popular decision that I ever took as a councillor in Camden, in terms of the way that people welcomed this move that the borough had made. But that decision, there was a big lead-up period to that, involving lots of different investigation and analysis by council officers. We very much did this in a deliberate way, doing lots of investigations, research and consideration of experience from other areas, including a lot of internal political discussion, both within the ruling party, and also we did secure cross-party agreement amongst all the parties in the council. We have 4 parties in the council in Camden at that time, and we had positive support from our scrutiny process, as well as it being something that I wanted to see happen as the cabinet member. We also had a lot of public campaigning going on by interested groups. 20's Plenty's been mentioned already earlier by Gary, and they were very interested in our work. And then we had our local cycling campaign, and cycling being a popular mode of travel in this area, and 20 miles per hour borough-wide was one of their main campaign goals and had been for a long time. So there was a lot of interest in the wider community. We did do a public consultation as well. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And there was quite a lot of interest from our local newspapers and local TV stations in London as well about how 20 miles per hour would work. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the communications channels we used. I'm going to talk about some of the arguments that we deployed, some of the issues that were thrown back at us, how we conducted our consultation, and then how we continued to raise awareness once we decided to implement our scheme. So that's just some of our branding. You can see there a nice sunny view of what 20 miles per hour would be, and very much encouraging people to give us their views. So what communications channels did we use? Well, we tried to use everything that we could, basically. We very much used Twitter and Facebook as methods to engage, through councillors tweeting, through the council itself using their own feed. We have a lot of online engaged people in Camden, and we have also a Facebook group for local cyclists which has thousands of people signed up to it. So we'll use that as well to try and get the world out there about what we wanted to do. We encouraged councillors as well to spread the word through their own local networks, and we used all the sites that we own where we can advertise at virtually no cost on our bus stops and buildings, and on street furniture, so we could encourage people to respond to our consultation as well. We have a council magazine that goes through every door in the borough, and we covered it in that, and we used the local media both through different stages of the consultation and what the people had said in the consultation, how we were responding, using those opportunities to get coverage in the local press and on the local television stations, but also proactively writing in letters, and others would, so that it was generating a debate really in the local area. Also, our local political parties and our local campaign groups, cycling campaign, living streets, etc., were involving telling their members about what we were doing as well. Next door in Islington, they'd also introduced a 20 mile per hour limit across their borough already, and that was an example that a lot of people looked to. They were the first borough in London to do that, and we were the second borough. So we already had an example next door of how it was working, and that was something that we found quite useful to refer to when we were discussing the issue. So moving on to the arguments that we put forward during the consultation to encourage people to support 20 miles per hour. Obviously, one of the big ones, probably the biggest, was the road safety issue. It's been talked about already. So we focused on the road safety benefits of this. We referred to DFT guidance about small reductions in average traffic speeds producing more significant reductions in collisions and casualties. And we referred to our own experience of implementing 20 miles per hour on a zone basis. So around half the borough was already covered in 20 miles per hour zones. So we had data and examples of what that had meant in terms of casualties, so we could demonstrate that we would like to see some safety benefits. It's fair to say we didn't try and over-egg the pudding. We didn't say, you know, if we implement 20 miles per hour, then everyone will start driving at 20 miles per hour and we'll see enormous reductions in casualties. We never tried to make it seem like it was a silver bullet to move to 20 miles per hour. We very much presented it as part of a range of different policies to improve road safety, so as not to try and seem unrealistic in the eyes of the population. So this is a map of our borough, and the reason I put it there is because what it does show is that it's in our town centres and on our main roads where we have the worst casualty issues. So although we'd already had 20 miles per hour zones in a lot of the residential areas, they're actually the areas on this map which don't have that many casualty problems. So on those main roads and in those town centres, those were the places that didn't actually have 20 miles per hour. So it shows that we did need to look again at the across the borough, including the main roads, if we wanted to further improve our casualty figures. Also, we looked at things like cycling casualties. We've had a lot of increase in cycling in London, and although overall casualty levels, road safety problems have decreased across all transport modes, you have seen increases in cyclist casualties more recently. So those are the road safety issues, and kind of linked to that was also active transport issues. Our policy as a council is to promote cycling and walking as a priority above other different transport modes, and we had people who represented those groups very much saying, this is what we want to do. We want 20 miles per hour because it will encourage more people to adopt these more healthy, active modes, which actually are good for them as they boost their own health. And we had supportive organisations that were very much backing us up on that, and that proved really helpful. So that was the second big area that we looked at. That's just some stats on how much cycling was going up in the borough at that time. So we had a projection of where we wanted to go, and we saw 20 miles per hour as a way of getting there. And also conversely, car use in the borough has been going down. So that was something that we could also refer to kind of allay concerns amongst certain people about this being kind of an anti-car move. We wanted to show that actually numbers of cars were going down in the borough anyway. The third area was environmental issues, important to boost the non-polluting forms of transport like walking and cycling, reducing harmful emissions. We've got a really bad air quality problem in this part of inner London, where we breach all the relevant health and safety standards that are set by the European Union. So we wanted to show that we were trying to shift to more less polluting forms of transport, and that would benefit everybody regardless of what transport mode you used. And also it was mentioned in some of the other presentations about creating more livable high streets and supporting business in our town centres. We saw 20 miles per hour as part of a kind of holistic package of boosting our high streets, and this was something that people really responded to very well. The final one was issues that I wanted to highlight was issues affecting motorists. Although what I pointed out before, we have got declining car ownership and we have got declining car use. This isn't about being anti-motorist. It's how it's perceived by some people. We wanted to offer reassurance it wasn't. Even if people were driving, were car owners, only a minority of our borough are car owners. Most of them, they don't want to live in a place where their families were at risk from speeding traffic. And also there are benefits to motorists as well. We had a situation before we implemented the borough-wide limit where people would be going from 30 miles per hour streets to 20 miles per hour streets, often in quick succession without any kind of logical pattern about why that was taking place. It was because of gradual implementation of 20 mile per hour zones over time, and we wanted to provide consistency and certainty for motorists about where they could, what the speed limit was. So I referred before to the census data on falling car ownership, so that was something that we could point to help reassure people, including councillors, about the differential use of different transport modes and how we didn't need to necessarily just focus on car owners, even if they were heavily opposed to 20 miles per hour. The arguments that were made against us, anyone familiar with the subject will be able to anticipate what they were. The cost at a time of reductions in local government spending was flagged up as an issue. We managed to reduce the cost fairly significantly by looking at what signage we actually needed to use. And the officers' predictions of how much it was cost came down over time. Effectiveness as well, a lot of people would say to me, well, in central London anyway, you can't ever get above 20 miles per hour because it's so congested. That's not actually true. We have lots of busy roads where people were driving a lot faster than 20 miles per hour. but they'd argue that police enforcement's already been talked about. When Islington, our next door neighbour, implemented their borough-wide limit, the police formally objected to that. They didn't do that in Camden. I think the debate had moved on in that time, and I had my photograph taken with a nice policeman from the Metropolitan Police with a 20-mile-per-hour sign, because they were, although they did not make any promises in terms of resourcing enforcement against 20 miles per hour, they did say that they were willing to do it where there was a proven road safety issue, and they certainly weren't going to oppose what we were trying to do because they can understand our motivations. Also, delays to buses and other vehicles was used. We did do some surveys of bus journey times, and the ones that we did, I think we did 3, it didn't show any particular problems in there. There are far more other issues involved in delays to vehicles than the speed limit, so it's not really a big factor. And we had a very thorough public debate about this, and in the town hall and in the local media. When we came to the consultation, I think Cambridge had the same results as us, which is 67% were in favour. We also had a lot of groups that were representing a lot wider pools of people, cycling campaigns, tenants and residents associations, and they were more heavily in favour. We didn't try and put a leaflet through everybody's door. We relied on online forms of communication and networks in the community in order to generate interest in the consultation. So we were quite pleased with the consultation results and thought that showed a clear mandate that people wanted us to move in this direction. As I said, I found it to be very popular. So just looking at the distribution of responses, again, the reason I put that down was because there's very different types of area within the borough of different levels of wealth, different proximity to central London, and what that shows is that there was broadly consistency across the whole of our borough in terms of who was in favour and who was against. There was no pockets of places where people were fiercely opposed, regardless of levels of car ownership or levels of wealth or other kind of geographical and demographic issues. We also looked at what people thought about the red routes, which are the TfL managed routes through London, and even with those there was a majority that were in favour of having those at 20 miles per hour. We already do have one that is 20 miles per hour in our borough because it's a very built-up area with lots of pedestrians, and in going forward it's very much something that we consider to be on the table, is whether we bring more of those red routes into the 20 mile per hour category, and there is some indication from Transport for London that they're happy to consider that in certain areas, and we'd like to do that. In terms of the different mode, we did ask people in the consultation to indicate whether what was their usual method of transport on a daily basis. So you get some interesting differences between, say, taxi drivers who were 100% opposed, and perhaps unsurprisingly, and then daily cyclists who are 90% in favour, and you get within that you get different levels for other types of transport, pedestrians, cyclists and bus users. And once we'd implemented our scheme, as we did in December 2013, we didn't really stop. We did some competitions with schools, so there's some of the entries that we received to design our new road signs. That got a lot of people interested and engaged as well, and was a good way of spreading the word that this is what we've now decided to do, and a way of educating people about the new policy. We also used things like lamppost banners to indicate the new policies that come into force. Obviously, I think it helps as well in terms of borough boundaries, because people will cross over and be more aware if they're travelling from a different borough that we have a different policy perhaps in that borough to the one that they were in previously. Another way of indicating to people. On the back of buses, that was something that we used to highlight to people as well. Obviously, evident to drivers as they're going behind the many buses that we have in this part of the world, what the actual policy is. And obviously on our own transport as well, there was an opportunity to highlight and spread the word about what our policy was. So that's just a few of the ways that we engaged with the public, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Phil. Yeah, if you can just keep it on that screen whilst we take any questions. So if anybody has any questions for Phil, please do type your questions now. You mentioned there, Phil, with your survey and the different people you asked, in particular cyclists and drivers and taxi firms, and it seemed like you had 100% objection from taxi firms. How did you overcome this, and did you talk to taxi bosses and firms about their fears?
Yeah, we do have a dialogue with taxi drivers. It's fair to say that they contact me on Twitter on a very regular basis to tell me their views. So there was all that going on. We weren't able to accommodate their concerns, and often they have got issues with the borough's transport policies more widely, and this was just another issue that they had with us. So we're always happy to talk to people and try to explain to them why we're doing certain policies, but I would be lying if I said that we managed to persuade them that 20 miles per hour was the right way to go. But you know, we can't always satisfy everybody, but what we did manage to do was get support from a majority of people who responded. So I didn't think it was a good enough reason to not proceed with the policy.
And Anna from 20's Plenty, she says, what would you do differently?
What would you do differently? I think we made some mistakes in terms of implementation. So we rolled out 20 miles per hour signs across the borough as you'd expect us to do, but we also ended up painting 20 miles per hour roundels on some nice cobbled streets in conservation areas, and these had to be quickly scrubbed off again because people obviously objected to that. So perhaps more of a light touch in terms and sensitivity into how we applied the requirements in terms of putting indications of 20 miles per hour in different areas. That would be one of the main ones. I think we could have afforded to be a bit more confident that we had public support. So it did take us a fairly long time to get to the point of implementation, having decided to work towards that goal, being quite careful and ensuring that we had plenty of debate and support. And actually, we were pushing on an open door, and that it didn't need to take all that effort. It was quite clear that most people were in favour of this and that it was a workable proposition. And so I think probably just having a bit more confidence that it was a popular thing and the right thing to do.
And just finally, Michael Grohl as well has said, was noise reduction used as an argument for 20 miles an hour?
Noise reduction didn't really come up as an issue. Not in Camden, not really. It wasn't a big thing. I mean, air quality used to come up quite a lot, but there were people who would say that it was good for air quality, people that say that it was bad for air quality. That's the one that I remember being quite a contentious area where people were citing evidence from one side or another. I think in terms of noise reduction, no, I think it's so noisy often in London anyway that it wasn't something that came up as a particularly big factor.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Phil. Like I say, if anybody's got any more questions, I know we've had a few come in after the speakers, so we'll try to get to those at the end and put them to all of our speakers. So thank you very much, Phil. So next we will be listening to Sergeant Paul Mountford from Merseyside Police and Nicola Wass from SOMO. I will be clicking through this presentation whilst we hear from Paul and Nicola, so do bear with us if there is a slight delay. And there's also a couple of videos to play, and with the webinar software that we have, there is a slight delay with sound and movement, so you just have to bear with us on that, but hopefully you will get the message across, and hopefully you'll still get the impact. So it's over to yourself, Paul and Nicola.
Hello. Is it possible to make the video full screen? Yeah, here we go. That's better. Thank you. So obviously this is Nicola, not Paul, speaking. Next slide, please. Just to give you a little bit of background, my organisation is called SOMO. We're a social innovation and engagement company based in Liverpool, and for the last 3 years we've been supporting partners to deliver the community engagement and communications element of our delivery. First of all, I'm going to give you a little bit of background. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because previous speakers have covered a lot of the arguments for 20 miles an hour. But I suppose really a key trigger for Liverpool was in the 2010 Child Casualties Report, the quite startling statistic that Liverpool's children face the second highest risk of becoming a road casualty in the UK. In 2011, Liverpool City Council and our Primary Care Trust, which no longer exists, but at the time agreed that they would kind of work together to adopt a 20-mile-an-hour scheme, and the PCT, the Primary Care Trust, made a grant to Liverpool City Council to fund some insight into understanding behaviours and attitudes around 20 miles an hour, to cover a large-scale public engagement campaign and some communication support to aid delivery. Next slide, please. So, similar to a lot of other areas, we're going for 20-mile-an-hour limits rather than zones, which means that it's about the area becoming normalised, the idea of 20 miles an hour becoming normalised. And the coverage that we're looking for in Liverpool is 70% of our roads becoming subject to 20 miles an hour. Like a lot of the other areas that we've heard from today, the ambition is for a sign-only area-based scheme, which is underpinned by a really solid body of public engagement. Clearly, Liverpool is quite a large city. Implementation of the signage and the engagement was then phased according to 7 delivery areas, which again, similar to other areas, they were divided using the main arterial routes, but the order was decided according to casualty rates. Okay, so the first piece of work that was carried out was some insight that the Primary Care Trust funded, and it told us some things that we were expecting and some things that perhaps we weren't so much expecting. The key thing was that people in Liverpool were generally fairly supportive of the idea of 20 miles an hour, but on the flip side, people tended to think that everybody else was the perpetrator. Children came through as a really significant motivating factor for influencing people's behaviours and attitudes, and we wanted to capitalise on that. And the other factor that really came out, and this was as much when we went out and started talking to people, was although people identify with Brown Liverpool, essentially people cared most about what happened in the streets in the immediate area around their own homes. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Yeah, hi, Sergeant Paul Mountford here, and I'll just talk through the next slide. Before I do so, I'd just like to say that we were involved at a very early stage in the 20-mile-an-hour rollout in Liverpool. We were identified as a key stakeholder, and from day one we were involved in any sort of activity planning and how it was communicated to the public and any engagement. In fact, any contribution we could make we were very open to, and so from day one we were very much part of the rollout in Liverpool. So the approach really was about targeting driver behaviour change, and as Nicola has already alluded to, children were identified by many communities as being a key motivator for that change. The risks to those children were on those smaller residential streets. The messages we communicated came from the community, not from the public sector, so we listened to what people said, and we actually tapped into a sort of feel on the street, if you like, and that was a key, a really strong part of the 20-mile-an-hour, the 20 effect as it became known. We worked together, very high visibility activity with buy-in from the communities. And I think all I'd say on this point as well is that I've been listening to the previous presentations and heard perhaps there's been a perception that police may have resisted becoming involved in 20-mile-an-hour rollout. It certainly wasn't the case in Liverpool, although we did from day one stress our abilities, if you like, to support the scheme. We didn't want to sort of promise people that we would do lots and lots of things and then let people down, so people were aware that of what we were able to do, and we worked to those limits. So.
Can I just come in quickly on the slide, because I think, sorry, could we go back one, please?
Yeah.
Okay, just emphasising the second bullet point there. I think a lot of people understand the arguments for 20 mile an hour, modal shift, noise pollution, reducing traffic noise. It's really important to stress from an engagement perspective that you need to use the messages that resonate with local people. And local people, more or less, I'm going to be a bit controversial here, didn't really care too much about those messages. They felt very public sector, public healthy. We kind of made sure that the message we were amplifying came from the community. It was about those authentic voices, finding people who are already passionate about reduced speeds in their areas, working with them to co-produce activity that would kind of garner talkability in the local communities, that would get the press and the media, get social media buzzing. That's really been the hub of our campaign and our approach, to make it real, to ground it within the community, and in many ways to remove it as far from the public sector partners in the sense of the look and feel of it as possible. Thank you. Should we kind of, do you want to go on?
Covered that one?
Well, I guess in a way, you know, so the other thing that's been really key for us is it's not just about the public sector doing work and their partners doing work. It's really been about helping communities to deliver their own activity. And sometimes in this campaign, we've actually heard about things secondhand that communities have done off their own back. And that, for me, is a really critical indicator of success, that the approach we've been taking in Liverpool has been working. Because when you can get that level, when you can get the communities engaged at that level, then I think you really know that you've ignited some kind of touch paper.
Yeah, I think as Nicola said there, I mean, a lot of the residential streets which fell under the 20-mile-an-hour the area of 20 mile an hour, the drivers that use those roads were in fact residents themselves. It was important that they understood the benefits of 20 and the risks involved in speeding down those streets to not just other people but their own families and themselves. So they were complying with the 20s because they understood the reason behind the 20s being there, as opposed to having a police officer stood waving a gun at them, or perhaps the fact there was a big sign saying it was 20. I like to think that they comply with the speed limit. They would drive slowly if there was no speed limit in place, because they can understand the risks involved with the hazards that are around those narrow streets. So,
I think another real part of the approach in Liverpool has been about creating a sense that we are all in this together. So I've spoken a little bit, and Paul's spoken a little bit about how kind of working very hands-on with communities to kind of get that sense of it being community-owned. This isn't just community-owned. There's a whole range of partners in Liverpool who've really got behind this, and we make very, very visible throughout all the activity we do, which really does give a we're all in this together feel, and again, moves us away from that sense that the public sector is telling most people what to do. Next slide, please. Okay. I'm going to talk through this one because it's a bit of an engagement specialist kind of slide, but if you can see that there's two circles which are grey areas. These, when you do engagement traditionally, you generally just get to those grey areas. You get to work with whoever you're engaging with on the ground, whether it's the community or the partners, and the people that they themselves immediately engage in an activity that you do. What's been really, really critical to our approach when we've gone in and worked with communities to deliver activity is that we've done things that have harnessed their own personal networks by giving people content to share with their own families and friends. So it may be that we've done a citywide football match in honour of a little boy who got killed on the road 10 years ago, and actually were we to just do a citywide football match, we would only really engage the families and the players. What we then do is we always create lots of really kind of interesting content for people to then share, whether it's photography or video of them with football club players, or, you know, because obviously we've got 2 football clubs here in Liverpool, you know, whatever it is, it's stuff that we give people that they can then share outside of the reach of our immediate network, so friends, family, and that in a sense is where the real value of our approach gets involved, because we're able to reach many, many more people. And you'll see in future slides that in Liverpool we also involve the press and PR, which also helps us to kind of get a lot more reach and coverage into people's networks.
Yeah, this slide just shows some of the sort of things that Nicola's been speaking about. The one on the left there is the football competition that we arranged in memory, as Nicola said, of a young lad who was killed on the roads. Bottom left, we went to Royal Mail, did a series of presentations with their staff quite early in the morning, unfortunately, where we would speak to the postal workers before they went out, quite large numbers of them. We did a handful of these across Liverpool. They, of course, use the roads on a fairly regular basis where there are 20-mile-an-hour speed limits in place. And the key message for them really was they were setting the standard. The professional drivers, they set the standard of driving, so they drive at 20 and everybody would follow at that speed.
And what was really brilliant about this partnership was then, if you imagine sort of from a branding point of view, the fleet that they will now use drives down residential streets maybe once, twice a day. So all of their fleet now have the 20-mile-an-hour logo on it. Next slide, please. Again, press and media has been really important. This is Northwest Tonight, which is our regional television covering roadside education that we've delivered. Lots and lots of different activity. Have a look on our Facebook page particularly, and you'll get a really good sense of what we've done. I think the one in the bottom middle is a playtime protest, a school pick-up protest that was organised with the school. It's just really been embedded in the community. But we won't talk through all of these because I'm aware of time. So next slide, please. Now, before we press any video here, just want to, for the purpose of this presentation, we just wanted to focus on one particular kind of key area of our delivery, which was roadside education. A lot of the engagement we do comes in prior to informal consultation and prior to the TROs, the traffic regulation orders being sent out. And that's really to kind of create this groundswell of support and understanding of the benefits for speed. And what's been brilliant in Liverpool is every single time we've managed to achieve over 90%, very high response rate and over 90% positive response to 20-mile-an-hour neighbourhoods. But this is an activity, I think, Paul, do you want to talk about?
Yes, yeah, you may have heard about this. I dare say it will take place elsewhere in the country, but we have run a number of kids courts. Not just in 20s but in 30s, but they were very, very suitable for 20-mile-an-hour areas. This particular kids court we ran was at Whitefield Primary School in Liverpool, quite a narrow residential street with a large school, which was a common, historically has had problems with speeding cars. So we had uniformed police officers who would stand at the roadside and would stop speeding drivers.
We did loads of engagement with the school beforehand as well, with the kids. And, this video just kind of really shows you, it's something that we would then share on social media. It's picked up, shown on television, the kind of activity and the impact that it has on drivers. Are you okay to play that?
Yeah, we'll play that with you.
We hope. Oh.
Do you know what the speed limit is on Boundary Lane?
Sorry guys, I don't know where that is, you know me.
Did you know this was a road with a school line and kids could be crossing outside?
No.
Hi, apologies. Hopefully you can all see this video, but unfortunately the sound isn't playing with it. Should have played, so I don't know whether if I pass over to yourself or you want to kind of talk through this.
Did you know it was proposed to reduce the speed limit in this area to 20 miles per hour?
Should pay more attention, look out for signs.
The format of the kids' court was quite simple. That we would stop speeding drivers.
My own little box.
Clearly those drivers that were driving
What's the thing that's kind of affected you most today? That a child could actually be killed based on the speed that I was going?
I've already decided to have my clocks checked, that's the cause of my speediness, so I wasn't aware of the speed that I was going, and I will be paying a lot more attention to the speeds I'm going and a lot more attention to my riding styles.
I mean, I've got a 16-year-old boy, and to do that, I mean, it's just, you don't want to even think about things like that, you know what I mean? So yeah, it does bring a lot of things on, and as you can see, I've still got grease pimples from the video, so yeah, it does. It really makes you think.
If you're going to speed, it's not worth it, it's not worth a life, it's not worth losing, I mean, potentially your own life as well as anyone else's.
When that question,
get out of your car, cut up your license if you're going to speed, there's no point.
Small children who are taking this issue incredibly serious, surrounded by artwork that the whole
keep it a
school
secret
created,
that I've had to come and do this, you know what I mean? Because I think a lot
somebody
of people
looked
should
me
be
now
aware
and
of
asked you that
that
question.
it's not a 40-mile-an-hour road down here, and it is a school here, and there's a lot of consequences.
And we make a video because actually watching the video,
you found that quite an emotional experience in there, didn't you? Do you wish you'd taken the points, or...?
No, I don't wish I'd taken the points because it's obviously had a massive impact, and you know, I won't be going over the speed.
I think without the sound we've probably got as far as we can go on it.
Yeah, apologies for that, and we will be able to hopefully share that video with all attendees afterwards. It's obviously a technical difficulty that we've had at our end, and we did have a practice earlier and it worked, so apologies that people can't hear the sound, but obviously with the images there you get the idea of the project that Paul and Nicola rolled out.
We'll wait for the slides to come up. So this activity has been repeated, hasn't it? You know, in different areas. It's one of our. It's sometimes when we do roadside education, it's one of the things we do. So we've talked a little bit about the engagement that we do in the run-up to 20 miles an hour, helping people build their own arguments, look at their own motivations and behaviours, and kind of, I suppose, what we're trying to create is a culture of self-enforcing behaviour. But when the signs come in, it can take quite a long time. I'm sure other areas are finding this. From initial consultation through to the signage actually being completely installed in an area. So we needed something that would again push the idea that we're working with communities, that we have engagement and education before enforcement is very much part of our approach. So how do we help continue that learning? How do we help kind of giving drivers opportunities to really question and analyse their own behaviour and to self-enforce going forward? So, you know, again, multi-agency work, we wanted to reinforce public attitudes to speed, post-signage. We wanted to keep very much the feeling we're all in this together. So when we do roadside education, it's delivered by a partnership with Merseyside Police, Merseyside Fire and Rescue, City Council, and also with partners from the local schools and the wider community. Next slide, please. We just had one problem, which was the Kids Court activity was incredibly powerful, and it had massive kind of press reach. It kind of got really buzzing sort of word of mouth talkability in the local community. It kind of just basically lit our social media channels up on fire with lots of people sharing it, talking about it. How do you create something like this with, next slide please. This, which is our youth service bus.
Yeah, this was a converted bus which we would park in a side street. I would, or a colleague would, perform some speed enforcement round the corner on a 20-mile-an-hour road. Drivers would be stopped. A vast majority of drivers, they weren't particularly driving at a very excessive speed. They were just unaware that the limit had changed. They'd be stopped and spoken to by myself, and would be invited to go on board the bus, where they would see a video.
Speed tester.
Oh yeah, they go on board the bus. There'd be a brake reaction tester there where we could test the reflexes and would highlight to them how far they travelled at the speed they were travelling at, just to emphasise the value of driving at a slower speed. There was a short video clip on board, and a member of the fire service was on board as well. I think that just to emphasise the joined up approach that we had. It wasn't just one organisation that was performing one role. We were all in it together.
But the problem that we had was basically take people into a bus, you can test their speed reaction, you can talk to them about the arguments. How are you going to get that really visceral reaction that you get from sitting in front of some really kind of empowered young people who were questioning you about your behaviour? How do we create that same kind of impact? So what we did, next slide please, was we went back to the school and we went back to those children and we said, look, you know, is there a way that we can share what you did with other drivers? And they agreed to take part in making a small film with us where they, and maybe we'll have sound this time, I don't know, let's have a go. And this is what we created. I hope you got the sound, this is like quite powerful.
Thank you for taking the time to talk about your driving. We want to ask you some really important questions.
Do you know the speed limit of the road you've just driven down?
Hi, apologies, it doesn't look like we've got sound again with this, so I don't know whether you want to talk briefly as
do you realise you were going too fast?
But like I say, we will be able to hopefully share this with attendees afterwards.
If I'd step out in front of your car,
okay, well, what we had as the children who took part in the initial exercise, and slightly different questions here, it's a different context.
Do you realise you could have killed one of us?
I hope you get to watch this video because it's actually quite powerful.
Just because you're a good driver, it doesn't mean that you're not dangerous.
But essentially the driver sat there and they watched this film. The children basically
just because you're surrounded by metal doesn't mean I am.
Again, it's just because you're...
Just because you use the road doesn't mean you're owning it.
Doesn't mean I am. This person's sort of saying just because you can drive on the road doesn't mean
residential streets in Liverpool are going down to 20 miles per hour.
the same kind of questions really, but
and there's
know,
a really
slightly
good reason for that.
presentation. And I think I asked the fire officer who was sitting in the bus, and I was like, look, you've been doing these all day. We sometimes actually have them queuing up outside the bus almost. And think, what's kind of really worked? What's made the impact on driving? And he said, well, most of them are quite happy to be in the bus and to talk to you, and they're shocked at the speed reaction. But when they watch this video, something changes in their whole body language. And he said, that's almost for us when the pennies drop, when it really sinks in. And this takes us right back to our initial piece of insight, that actually, in Liverpool, the biggest single motivating factor that kind of helps people to really think about their behaviour and challenge how they're driving is that statistic, and the fact that it's children who ultimately are kind of most vulnerable to cars that are driving over 20 miles an hour. No need to really talk through that, is there?
No, I think you can just read some of the comments of drivers who actually went onto the bus and went through that procedure. Just a few of them there to pick out.
The big thing we want to do is we don't want people to feel ashamed, we don't want people to feel angry. The police at that time in a really difficult position, because I'm right in saying that you couldn't put people driving at 20 miles an hour on a speed awareness course.
No.
So this was our version of that, in a sense, a bite-sized kind of attempt to help people change behaviour through learning rather than just kind of punitive measures. Next slide, please.
Okay. Yeah, I think this is one for me because it's got the big enforcement word at the top of it. Yeah. Again, it's been a common theme throughout the previous presentations around enforcement and what the police can and can't do. We do perform enforcement, and we are heavily involved in the rollout of 20 mile an hour. I think it's not about the police saying that we can't do it because we haven't got resources. It's about looking at limited resources and how to make the smartest use of those resources. So if there are any engagement activities taking place or any enforcement activities taking place, we really do need to capitalise on those. And it's a question of sort of winning the hearts and minds of the public to say that the police are involved in the scheme. We do perform enforcement, and we also perform lots of engagement and education as well, of course. And again, we're very proud of what we do with the 20 mile an hour scheme.
Yeah, and I think, that relationship, it did start off with the police were nervous, and I think personally, understandably, there's a lot of schemes that come on, there's a lot of noise made, a lot of activity generated, and then the bus goes out of town and the police are left kind of going, okay, well, we're being expected to enforce everywhere. Whereas actually what we managed to do was really create this whole working in together culture in Liverpool, where people bring the right resources to the right job, and through that I think it's been much, much stronger. Would you agree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Okay, well that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Paul, Nicola. If you can stay there for a moment whilst we take any questions. So again, if you have any questions for Paul and Nicola, do type your questions in the question box. I will just go through those. First of all, I suppose you mentioned there, Paul, about the difficulties and resources, and I know we've heard a lot from our previous councillors and officers at councils, and that sometimes is the difficulty that we often hear from campaigners and people about, how is this going to be enforced? And obviously it's great that in Liverpool they had you on board from the start. How did those conversations begin, and what persuaded you and what made you decide, yes, this is something that the police do want to be behind, and we can enforce and can put resources to it, because obviously we all appreciate the strain that the police forces are under at the moment with certain limits. So how did you manage to be able to persuade your bosses and the force as a whole that you could back this campaign and put police weight behind it?
Well, I'm not going to lie about it. It wasn't easy. I think there was a great deal of resistance, maybe too strong a word, but certainly reluctance, yeah, around the police. Because obviously we realised we were very limited with resources to what we could do. We didn't want to promise people that we would do a level of activity and then fail to deliver. So there was some reluctance on the police to get involved in the 20s, but at the end of the day, they were going to come in with or without us, and we could make a really good contribution by being involved with it. I think once we convinced superior officers, if you like, that there was a need for us to be involved, and I was identified as the person to be that sort of link, if you like. My role in the police is around casualty reduction, and clearly 20 mile an hour can make quite a positive impact on reducing the numbers of casualties. So we did have a vested interest in this. It's one of our force priorities, if you like. So yeah, that's how it went, and I think we see, although we do have limited resources, again, it's not about us saying we can't do things because of that. It's about us looking at the limited resources that we've got and making the best use of them. So again, if it is engagement or education, that's what we would do. We'd be at the forefront of that alongside the likes of Nicola and the fire service and the local councils. Really, it's very apt that I'm here in the office of SOMO doing the presentation, because it really has been a team effort, and this presentation has also been a team effort. So rather than the police standing alone and shall we say, bragging about what they've done, it's certainly not been the case in Liverpool. It's been a very joined-up approach.
Thank you. We've got a question here from Anna from 20's Plenty, but she says, can other authorities either buy or use your video of the children asking these questions? You know, do you realise you've killed me? Or I guess it's something that they could easily reproduce themselves and maybe have discussions with yourself.
Well, the resources are owned by the local authority, so I can't speak on behalf of the local authority, but I would suggest that there shouldn't be a problem with that. All of our videos are on the Facebook page, which are linked to a YouTube account. So if people wanted to certainly view that video, and then if you email myself, I can pass it on to the respective officers. But yeah, that video is available to view on YouTube, and I think, you know, it is really worthwhile, you know, kind of doing something like this, just to take away the public sector voice, get the voice of people, children actually speaking. So yeah, I know that's not a direct answer, but I'm not really in a position to kind of give you a direct answer on that one.
No, I think that's brilliant, and I think, like you say, that works very well. And with videos that we produce here at Break, we find that kind of message and using young people in particular is very very important. I've got a message here from Pam, who says in her area some villages have put out 20 mile an hour signage on their bins. She likes this idea, but is it legal?
I'm not certain. It really is for the local authority around whether that size that they use, if it does resemble a 20 mile an hour roundel, for example, then I guess it would have to comply with certain regulations. So I wouldn't be 100% sure on my answer on that one. She'd really have to speak to a local authority and just confirm that. But it does sound like a really good idea.
It just sounds like a great kind of guerrilla type activity. A community's been able to put their views publicly, but you know, and I personally doubt that anybody would kind of get confused with a bin and a road sign.
I think it just needs to be in people's faces, doesn't it? Being blunt about it, and certainly. We haven't mentioned things like community speed watch, which we're pushing in Merseyside as a really key tool, a really good tool to enforce, not to enforce, but to really re-enforce, if you like, 20 mile an hour speed limit signs. It's having a presence. It gives the police a presence at the roadside, which doesn't detract from their limited resources, although we do provide the community officers to run those schemes. So it's one good tool that we have, which helps us to support the 20 mile an hour speed limits.
Can I just go back to the previous question, because one thought has occurred. I think those children, when they're speaking, they're Liverpool children. You hear their Liverpool accents. Goes back to people care most about their neighbourhood. It resonates. I would probably advise that if you like that video, that you look to create something similar using your own children. I think that really kind of rooted community approach works, and that's just a thought for people, really.
Yeah, I think we agree through Break as well. I think that the local community is a powerful tool, and it's been mentioned a few times by the local authorities as well, how we can, you know, how you can use that to your advantage, and people do care about the area that they live in. Tim Robinson put in a question. It was actually before your presentation, so you've kind of answered part of it, but he was saying about 20 mile an hour and how you intend to kind of manage and justify, I suppose, the police's involvement in maintaining responsible speed. So I know you said you're responsible for casualty reduction, and obviously you feel 20 mile an hour in your area helps towards those targets. But did you have any particular targets that you had to meet, Paul, and did you have to justify your involvement and your time and energy into this, and if so, who did you have to kind of justify that to, and who did you have to answer to?
Yeah, it was easy to justify. As I say, my role is in casualty reduction, and clearly the benefits have been well documented around 20 mile an hour schemes, and certainly the research that we did in Liverpool with communities really showed that people wanted 20 mile an hour speed limits. But for me as a police officer in casualty reduction, we have an issue with cycling in the city where we're seeing a lot of casualties on cycles. That is linked to 20 mile an hour. Pedestrian safety, again, clearly linked to 20 mile an hour, along with all the other road user categories that are becoming KSIs, if you like. So 20 mile an hour has got an important role to play, so it was very easy for me to justify to my superiors in the Merseyside police as to what we should be doing. If that answers the question.
I think other partners were so keen to get involved because even if you look at Royal Mail, they have collision reduction targets. If you go to Merseyside Police, they've got collision reduction targets. If you go to Merseyside Fire and Rescue, they've got collision reduction targets. My background's partnership working, and actually at a time when we have less resource, actually being able to align some capital resource, some revenue, working collaboratively means that you get much more impact with a more effective and efficient way. So the argument for partnership work was not one that was particularly hard to make.
Yeah, and I'd echo that. That's something that we obviously work with at Break. We have lots of partner organisations and also companies that we work with who are very keen to reduce collisions at the workplace and obviously in their communities as well. So there is that opportunity, as you say, where you worked with Royal Mail, that there are other opportunities in other areas where there might be big employers that the local authority, police, road safety partnerships can work with those and get on board. And if anybody needs any more advice or help with that, then do get in touch with us here at Break, and we might see if we can actually link you with anybody in those areas. I just have one last question here from Melissa, again at Calderdale Council. She says, how did you get agreement by the speeders to have their experience shared? Was it an option between a ticket or going into the school? I know the actual video would have explained that, but if you might be able to explain that, Paul. And also, was the two that are in the video are very forthcoming and praised the youngsters for questioning them, and they obviously must have signed some disclaimer or were very happy to share their experiences. But did you get any kind of negative experience where people didn't want to have their experience shared?
Yeah, being blunt about it, we were given a very simple option basically. It was literally a fixed penalty ticket or the option to go into school and spend a short period of time with the children. So yeah, the blunt answer is it was a very simple choice. I would say that some people most people choose to go into the school, and it wasn't an easy option. Whilst they were saving money and they weren't getting penalty points, we did have a number of people in tears. Some people, we showed a short video at the end of the school interaction with the children, which was a montage of young children, which consisted of photographs taken by their parents at notable times in their lives, first days at school, playing on the beach, family holidays, etc., in the swimming pool. And that montage was, all the children in the montage had been killed by a speeding driver, and we were quite blunt about it, and we basically said, yeah, you are a speeding driver and you could kill one of those children that you just see.
One of the people we interviewed, so first of all, we got permission off everybody and we explained what the video would be used for, and we got signed permission. And if you're doing anything like this, it's incredibly important that you're very upfront with people about what you're looking to do, what you're looking to share, and you get signed agreement. So that, just to cover that. Later on in that video, there's a lady who doesn't face the camera. It's actually me interviewing her. And she was quite upset by it, and I asked her, actually, would you found that quite an emotional experience in there, would you rather have taken the points? And she said no, because actually, although that's kind of been really moving and it has affected me, I feel like it's something that I want to go out and talk to other people about. I feel like it's something that it's really important for me to learn that lesson, and she was quite passionate about going out and actually being an advocate. Had she just been given points, her story, her narrative when she went back into the community could have been very different. A, she may not have mentioned it to anybody because she was ashamed, or B, she could have been angry by the fact that she felt it was unduly onerous. So, you know, it's really, really important. We don't want to make people pariahs. We don't want to make people, you know, unhappy. But at the end of the day, we are talking about kind of something that is so ubiquitous. Road traffic collisions, you know, we do engagement with communities, and we ask people to put their hands up. And one of the first questions we ask them is, have you or a close member of your friends or family been involved in a collision? And over 2/3 of the room put their hands up. And I think that's the thing that you really need to get home. People care, because most people's lives have been touched in some way by a road traffic collision.
Okay.
No, definitely. Well, thank you very much for that. Thank you very much for everybody for holding on. I know we've slightly run over here, and thank you for everybody who is still holding on for this. I've just got one last question that has come in for yourself, Andy. Hopefully you're still with us.
I am, yeah.
Andy Preston, yeah. So Cambridge City Council. Gary Shipp has got in touch, and whether you can answer this now, but he says he's representing a town council wishing to see a 20-mile-an-hour scheme in their small town, but their highways authority seem reluctant due to the absence of funding. I think he said here, I'm sure this was yourself, you quote the cost of £3,800 per mile. Do you think this cost would be reflected in a much smaller scheme covering 2 to 3 miles?
Well, certainly the cost of implementing signs and lines only is a very low cost. Obviously, without seeing the area that's involved and the layout of the highway network, it's very difficult to comment on that. But I would suggest it would actually be less. A smaller area of a handful of streets would be potentially significantly less than that, based on the number of signage in the size of the zone or the size of the limit. So it's a relatively inexpensive highway scheme to implement, as it is only signs and lines. So it is inexpensive. For example, a repeater sign attached to an existing lamp column on our projects in the north area costs £30 to purchase and install. So it is a very inexpensive highway scheme to implement.
And I suppose he's saying there obviously reluctance from their local authority. Obviously, thank you very much for sharing your presentation with us today, and other council representatives who are on the phone. Have you had any other councils get in touch with yourself to learn from this, or is this something that you're willing to engage in and kind of talk to neighbouring authorities and other councils to try and implement it and kind of learn obviously from your mistakes?
Yes, no, definitely. We've had quite a few other authorities contact us. They visited us. We've also visited Hertfordshire County Council, and I've also presented to one of their scrutiny committees throughout their decision-making process about whether to implement 20 miles per hour on a large scale in the county of Hertfordshire. So yes, more than happy for any local authority to contact us directly.
Thank you very much, Andy. And like I say, we will share a lot of our resources, these presentations and contact details. So if anybody does have any more questions or information that they would like to receive from these speakers, then do get in touch with us at Break, and all the speakers are happy to answer questions. So we can put those to them at a later stage. But thank you very much for everybody who has attended today, and apologies if we haven't quite managed to get around to your question. We will keep a list of these questions and hopefully respond to you as soon as possible. Thank you very much for everybody who's attended, and I hope you have found it useful. It's great to have so much interaction from attendees and asking so many questions. I think it's the most questions we've had on one of these webinars, so it's great that so many people are being engaged and listening in. Thank you very much to all our speakers as well for giving up their time today and delivering their message. I think all of them have offered some relevant points, and hopefully there's something to learn for anybody. But like I say, we will be emailing you all out over the next couple of days to give you links to where the presentations are, also the videos available via the Facebook pages. So I will send those on from Paul and Nicola as well. Thank you again to Allianz as well, obviously, for sponsoring today's webinar, which has meant that it's been free and everybody's obviously been able to attend and dial in from the comfort of their office or home to listen in today. So thank you to them, and thank you to everybody for attending. I have been made aware that I know earlier the national 20 mile an hour national conference was mentioned. I think it was Roger who said he had attended. The next one, note for your diaries, is on the 12th of March 2015. So that's the 12th of March 2015, and it is in Cambridge. That's the 20 mile an hour national conference. So anybody who is thinking of implementing this or wants to learn more, then I would suggest that is a conference for yourselves. But thank you very much for everybody for attending today. Any more questions or any particular points you want to put towards break or any of our speakers, then do get in touch with us. And thank you very much for attending today. Have a good rest of your day.